My wife hit the concrete so hard I heard the crack from 10 feet away. Eleanor lay beside the planter, blood running into her silver hair, and my son-in-law Blake didn't rush to help her. He looked down and said, "There. Now maybe everyone will admit you two can't take care of yourselves." I had watched him slide his foot behind her ankle, deliberately. Then he turned to me. "This family needs someone competent in charge." In that moment, I understood my wife's blood wasn't a tragedy to him. It was evidence. Please, before we continue, subscribe to the channel and tell us in the comments where you're listening from today. "Mom," Caroline dropped beside Eleanor. I called 911. 10 minutes earlier, Blake had demanded $200,000 from my retirement savings. I refused. He replied, "Then maybe Caroline needs to start making decisions for you." Now Eleanor was bleeding on our driveway. Her hand found mine. "Harold," he tripped me. "I know." Blake heard her. "You fell, Eleanor. I saw your foot. You're confused." That word caught my attention. Not injured, not shaken, confused. He was already changing the story. Sirens grew louder. Blake looked at Caroline. "This is what I've been warning you about. Your mother's mobility is getting worse. Your father is making reckless financial decisions. They shouldn't be living alone. Dad refusing to give you money isn't reckless," Caroline snapped. The ambulance arrived. One paramedic asked what happened. Blake answered first. "She lost her balance. It's been happening more often. We've been discussing assisted living." Then I noticed the small black camera beneath the garage eave. It pointed at the driveway, its red light blinking. The microphone was active, so I stayed quiet and let him talk. "Ma'am, do you remember falling?" the paramedic asked Eleanor. "I didn't fall," she whispered. Blake stepped closer. "She's disoriented from hitting her head." The paramedic looked at him. "Sir, let her answer." Blake backed away. For a second I saw fear. He feared what Eleanor might say. As they lifted her onto the stretcher, Caroline climbed into the ambulance. Blake stopped me near the garage. "Tomorrow we're dealing with this." "Dealing with what?" "Power of attorney, the house, your finances, all of it." "You think this gives you that right?" He leaned closer. "After today, Harold, proving you two can't manage yourselves won't be difficult." Then he smiled. "Take the hint before Caroline has to make the decision for you." He drove away behind the ambulance. I stared at Eleanor's blood, then walked into my office. From a locked drawer I removed a phone Blake had never seen. Victoria Sterling answered on the second ring. "Harold, activate our plan." Silence. Her voice sharpened. "What happened?" Blake heard Eleanor. "Deliberately? Yes. Can you prove it?" I looked toward the camera. "Every second." "Then don't confront him. Let him believe you're frightened." "Why?" "Because if he thinks today worked, he'll show us what he planned to do next." I removed the security recorder and headed for the hospital. Blake believed I was a 71-year-old retired distribution manager with an old car, a modest home, and a retirement account he could pressure me into surrendering. I had let him believe it. He didn't know about Victoria. He didn't know about the contingency plan, and he had no idea how much of the life he bragged about existed because I had quietly allowed it to exist. As I started the car, I looked once more at the blood on my driveway. Blake thought he had frightened an old man into submission. What he had actually done was wake up the one man he should never have underestimated. An hour before Eleanor's blood stained our driveway, Blake was sitting at my dinner table telling my wife she was too old to carry a serving bowl. "Give me that before you drop it," he said, taking it from her hands. Eleanor stared at him. "I've managed a bowl for 69 years. That's exactly the problem." "You still think you're 30. Caroline forced a laugh. "Blake, enough." Sunday dinner had been our family tradition for years, but lately Blake treated every visit like an inspection. If Eleanor forgot where she put her glasses, he noticed. If I asked him to repeat something, he noticed. If either of us moved slowly, he exchanged a look with Caroline as if collecting evidence. That night, however, he hadn't come to discuss our health. After dinner, he placed his phone on the table and said, "Harold, I need $200,000. Eleanor stopped clearing the plates. "Excuse me?" "It's for Vantage Flow, short-term operating capital. 90 days, maybe less." "You want us to give you 200,000? I asked. "Invest, not give." "What happened to your last funding round?" His smile tightened. "Timing issue." "Monthly burn?" That's complicated. Revenue? Growing. Debt? Manageable. I leaned back. Then show me the numbers. Blake's expression changed. I didn't come here for an audit. You're asking for $200,000 of our retirement money. You came for exactly that. Caroline touched his arm. Maybe we should discuss this later. He pulled away. There is nothing to discuss. I have contracts closing. I need liquidity until they do. Then a bank should be happy to lend against those contracts. Silence. That told me more than his answers had. The banks are being cautious with startups, he said. Then I should be cautious too. You're sitting on money you don't even use. Eleanor returned to the table. That's our money, Blake. He laughed under his breath. For what? You drive a 12-year-old car. You haven't taken a real vacation in years. You live like you're afraid of enjoying anything. We live the way we choose, I said. Exactly. And maybe that's becoming the problem. Caroline frowned. What does that mean? Blake looked at her, then at us. Your parents are getting older. Your mom nearly fell carrying groceries last month. Harold still insists on handling every account himself. At some point we have to talk about whether this is responsible. Eleanor's face hardened. I slipped on ice. And next time? There is no next time yet. Blake leaned toward Caroline. This is what I mean. They refuse to acknowledge reality. I finally understood the direction he was moving. You asked me for money. I said no. Now you're questioning whether I'm capable of managing it. I'm saying families plan before there's a crisis. What kind of plan? Eleanor asked. Blake answered too quickly. Downsize the house. Maybe assisted living eventually. Caroline could help manage the accounts. Power of attorney would make things easier. Caroline stared at him. We never agreed to that. Because every time I bring it up, you get emotional. They're my parents, which is why you should protect them. I pushed my chair back. We're done. Blake stood. You'd rather let $200,000 sit in an account than help your daughter's husband save a company? If your company requires my retirement savings to survive, you haven't given me an investment opportunity. You've given me a warning. His face reddened. Eleanor touched my shoulder. Harold, let it go. Blake looked at her hand, then back at me. You think saying no ends this? It ends tonight. No, it just proves what I've been telling Caroline, which is, he picked up his jacket, that neither of you understands what's best anymore. Caroline followed him toward the door. Blake, apologize. He ignored her. At the threshold, he turned back. You know what I don't understand, Harold? That money is going to Caroline someday anyway. Why make everyone wait until you're dead to use it? For several seconds, nobody spoke. Then Eleanor quietly said, Get out of my house. Blake smiled. Fine. But the look he gave me as he walked toward the driveway told me the conversation wasn't over. He had asked for my money and heard no. Now I could see him considering a much uglier question. What if my permission was no longer necessary? Blake's last sentence stayed with me after he stepped onto the porch. That money is going to Caroline someday anyway. Eleanor followed him outside with the jacket he had left on the dining chair. Caroline was near the SUV, arguing with him. I stayed by the door, still thinking about the $200,000 he had demanded from us. You forgot this, Eleanor called. She walked down the driveway carefully. I watched Blake look at her, then at me. His anger had not disappeared. Eleanor was 3 steps away when he moved. He slid 1 foot behind her ankle and turned into her path. She caught his shoe and went forward. Her temple struck the concrete planter beside the garage. Caroline screamed. I ran toward her. For half a second, Blake simply stared down at Eleanor. Then he smiled. There. Now maybe everyone will admit you two can't take care of yourselves. While I called 911, Caroline pressed a towel against her mother's head. Blake started talking about assisted living, finances, and someone responsible taking control. But one phrase from dinner kept returning to me. Power of attorney. He had said it too naturally. Not as a possibility, as a plan. At the hospital, that suspicion became harder to ignore. Eleanor needed stitches, but the scan showed no fracture. Caroline stayed beside her while Blake paced outside the treatment room, irritated rather than frightened. I went for coffee and heard his voice around the corner. You have to stop hesitating, he told Caroline. Not tonight. Tonight is exactly why we need it. My mother is in there because... She stopped. Blake lowered his voice. Because she fell. Now we have proof they can't manage alone. Proof? You know what I mean. Then I heard paper unfold. I already had the documents prepared. I stopped walking. Caroline sounded stunned. What documents? Durable power of attorney. One for Harold, one for your mother. Financial and medical authority. They sign, you take over the accounts, and we stop having this argument. You had these made before tonight? I was planning ahead. Without telling me? Because you never act until there's a crisis. I backed away before they saw me and returned to Eleanor's room through another corridor. My wife was awake. You heard something, she said. Blake brought power of attorney papers to the hospital. Her eyes sharpened. Already prepared? I nodded. Then this didn't start tonight. That was what frightened me. Blake had asked for $200,000, questioned our judgment, suggested assisted living, and arrived with legal documents ready for signatures. Eleanor's fall had not created the plan. It had accelerated it. My phone vibrated. Victoria Sterling had sent one message. Contingency initiated. Preserve everything. Say nothing. I slipped the phone away as Caroline entered. Her face was pale. Dad, Blake thinks tomorrow we should discuss some paperwork. What kind? I asked, pretending ignorance. She couldn't meet my eyes. Just something so I can help if you or Mom ever need me. Eleanor took her hand. Do you think we can't make our own decisions? Caroline's eyes filled. No. Then why would we sign away the right to make them? Before Caroline could answer, Blake entered carrying a folder. Nobody is signing away anything. This is basic estate planning. I looked at it. You brought it with you? I keep important documents in the car. Convenient. His smile tightened. Tomorrow morning we can discuss it when everyone is calmer. I nodded. Tomorrow, relief flashed across his face. He thought I was weakening. He had no idea Victoria was already moving. The garage camera had recorded his foot moving behind Eleanor's ankle. By morning, Blake planned to put papers in front of me that could hand control of our money to Caroline. What he didn't know was that before he could ask for my signature, I intended to learn exactly how long he had been planning to take it away. At 8:10 the next morning, Blake walked into Eleanor's hospital room carrying the folder like a man arriving to close a deal. He didn't ask how she slept or whether her head still hurt. He placed the papers on the tray table. This will make things easier for everyone. Explain it, I said. Blake opened the folder. Durable power of attorney. Caroline would handle banking, bills, medical decisions, property, the things becoming difficult for you. Becoming difficult? Eleanor asked. Yesterday speaks for itself. Yesterday I was tripped. Blake sighed. This is exactly the confusion I'm worried about. Caroline turned. Don't call Mom confused. I picked up the document but didn't sign. And if I refuse? Then Caroline may eventually have to consider stronger options, such as a competency evaluation, guardianship if necessary. There it was. He had gone from asking for money to discussing legal control in less than 24 hours. I looked at the signature line. Give me until tonight. Blake smiled. Of course. He believed fear was finally working. After he left, Caroline whispered, Dad, don't sign anything. I wasn't planning to. I didn't know he had those papers. But you knew he wanted control. Caroline's eyes filled. He kept saying he was protecting you from bad decisions. I thought he meant helping someday. Did he ever ask about our money? I said. He asked what you had in retirement, whether the house was paid off, whether you had trusts. What did you tell him? That you never discussed money with me. At 10, Victoria arrived. To Caroline, I introduced her only as an old family attorney. She reviewed Blake's documents and found language broad enough to give Caroline authority over nearly every financial asset we controlled. Do not sign this, she said. When was it prepared? Victoria checked the drafting information. The template was created weeks ago. Caroline went white. Blake had been preparing for a crisis before the crisis existed. Victoria asked Caroline to get coffee with Eleanor's nurse. Once we were alone, she opened her case. The contingency is moving. Do you want full activation? Not yet. Why? I want Blake to show us the entire plan. I told her about competency and guardianship. She nodded. Then he's escalating faster than expected. Victoria had already secured the driveway footage. One angle showed Blake looking directly at Eleanor before moving his foot behind her ankle. The audio captured what he said afterward. "This is strong," she said. "Don't reveal it yet." Agreed. "If he thinks the camera caught him, he'll change tactics. I want him confident." That afternoon, Blake returned with coffee and concern he hadn't shown the night before. A nurse asked Eleanor whether she felt safe returning home. Blake answered for her. "That's what we're trying to determine. Our house has been safe for 32 years, I said. "Things change. People do too," Eleanor replied. Blake ignored her. Then he made his mistake. "Once Caroline has authority, we can move quickly." The nurse frowned. "Authority for what?" Blake hesitated. "Helping them." When she left, I asked, "Move quickly on what?" "Whatever needs to be done." "The house? Possibly. Our investments? If necessary. My retirement account?" He paused. "If that's what's best for the family." I nodded as if considering it. He didn't want permission to help us. He wanted permission to replace us. Before leaving, Blake tapped the unsigned papers. "Tonight, Harold. I need an answer. You'll have one." After he walked away, Victoria sent me a still image from the security recording. Blake's shoe behind Eleanor's ankle, frozen 1 second before she fell. Beneath it, she wrote, "We have him." I stared at the image, then at the power of attorney papers. Blake thought he was giving me until tonight to surrender. In reality, I was giving him until tonight to expose exactly how far he planned to go. Victoria's message stayed on my screen. "We have him." But the image of Blake's shoe behind Eleanor's ankle was only one piece of what I needed. I had spent most of my career watching executives make the same mistake. They assumed the quiet man in the room had nothing to say because he had nothing to hide. Blake had made that mistake with me for years. By noon, Eleanor was cleared to go home. Caroline drove her. I told Blake I needed a few hours before discussing the power of attorney. He smiled like a man waiting for surrender. Then, I drove to Sterling Private Capital. Victoria met me in a conference room with no windows and 3 folders on the table. "Before we activate everything," she said, "you need to understand what he thinks he owns." I sat down. "Show me." The first folder contained the public version of my life. Pension, income, our house, ordinary investment accounts, the 12-year-old sedan Blake mocked whenever he visited. The second contained the life Blake had never bothered to discover. 23 years earlier, while working as a regional distribution operations director, I had built freight routing software at night to solve problems my employer couldn't. That side project became a warehouse optimization company. 12 years later, I sold it. We kept the same house, helped Caroline when needed, and invested the rest. "Current structure?" I asked. Victoria opened the third folder. Whitaker Meridian Holdings controlled several commercial properties and private investments. Meridian Growth Partners handled a smaller venture portfolio. I looked at one line and felt my jaw tighten. Vantage Flow Systems. How much? Across 2 rounds, $1.4 million. 3 years earlier, Victoria had brought me an investment opportunity in a supply chain startup. Blake never knew I was behind the vehicle funding it. I had approved the investment because the technology had potential and because Caroline believed in her husband. So the money keeping his company alive. A meaningful portion came from you. And the office? Victoria turned the page. Vantage Flow's headquarters occupied the 4th floor of a building owned through Whitaker Meridian Holdings. Blake had bragged about the prestigious address. He had no idea his rent ultimately flowed into a company I controlled. Eleanor's bandaged head came back to me. "Is Vantage Flow healthy?" Victoria's expression answered before she spoke. "No, cash reserves are nearly exhausted. Payroll becomes difficult within weeks unless new money arrives. The $200,000 would buy time, not save the company." She showed me expense reports. Luxury car payments categorized as executive transportation. Restaurants, hotels. Designer purchases described as client development. "He has been using company money to finance the image of success," she said. "Can we prove misuse?" "An audit can." I leaned back. Suddenly, Blake's behavior made sense. He wasn't trying to expand. He was trying to survive long enough to find another source of cash. What happens if Meridian stops supporting him? His runway collapses, and the building? His lease contains default provisions tied to financial representations. Victoria studied me. "Harold, Once we move, he will know someone powerful is behind this. But not who. Not immediately. That mattered. I wanted Blake to keep looking at me and seeing a frightened retiree. My phone buzzed. A message from him. Tonight, 7 p.m. Bring the signed POA. We need to stop wasting time. I showed Victoria. He thinks I'm signing. Are you? I closed the folder. I'm going to let him believe I might. Victoria nodded. Then we prepare both doors. If he backs off, we protect you and Eleanor. If he pushes forward, we activate the financial side. I stood to leave, then looked once more at Vantage Flow's name beside mine. For years, Blake had entered my house wearing expensive watches, mocking my old car, explaining business to me as if I had spent my life counting boxes in a warehouse. I had never corrected him. Now I finally understood the advantage that had given me. Blake wasn't trying to steal from a helpless old man. He was threatening the person who quietly owned the floor beneath his office and had helped pay the bills that kept his company alive. And at 7 that night, I intended to sit across from him and find out just how far he was willing to go before I pulled my hand away. At 7 that evening, Blake arrived at our house carrying the power of attorney papers and the confidence of a man who thought fear had finally done his work. Eleanor sat beside me on the sofa, a white bandage above her temple. Caroline stood near the fireplace. I had told her only that I wanted to hear Blake explain himself. So, he said, dropping the folder onto the coffee table, are we ready to stop fighting? I picked up the pen. Tell me what happens after I sign. Blake leaned forward. Caroline handles the accounts. We simplify your finances, evaluate the house, and make sure you and Eleanor are somewhere safe. And the 200,000, once Caroline has authority, she can decide whether helping Vantage Flow makes sense. Caroline stared at him. You mean you can pressure me instead of Dad? I mean we make decisions as a family. No, Eleanor said. You mean you make them? Blake's smile disappeared. I kept the pen in my hand. Suppose I sign tonight. How quickly do you need the money? Tomorrow. That quickly? Payroll timing. Yesterday you said 90 days. Things changed. They had. Just not in the way he understood. My phone vibrated once in my pocket. Victoria's signal. Everything was ready. I put the pen down. I need one more night. Blake stood so fast the table shook. No, you've had enough time. Blake, Caroline warned. He pointed at Eleanor's bandage. Look at your mother. How many warnings do you need before one of them gets seriously hurt? Eleanor stared at him. You already made sure of that. His face tightened. I am done being accused because she can't walk properly. Caroline went still. I saw something change in her eyes. Blake grabbed the folder. Fine, tomorrow morning. But if you refuse again, we do this the harder way. Guardianship? I asked. He paused. Whatever protects them. After he left, Caroline whispered, Dad, what is happening? Tomorrow I'll show you. At 8:16, I called Victoria. Full activation. Confirmed, she said. Once I start, we don't put everything back neatly. Start. The first notice went to Vantage Flow. Meridian Growth Partners was suspending additional capital, pending an immediate financial review. The next went to the property manager. Blake's company was already behind on lease obligations, so formal default procedures could begin. Then came the audit. Victoria's team had preserved expense records showing luxury vehicle costs, hotels, restaurants, personal purchases, and transfers Blake would have to explain. Everything stays legal, I said. Every step, Victoria replied. We used the rights in the contracts he signed. Blake was probably asleep, believing he had given an old man one final deadline. He didn't know his investor had stopped the oxygen. He didn't know his landlord had begun enforcing the lease. And he didn't know auditors were opening the books he had refused to show me. The next morning, I called him before 8. I've made a decision. His voice brightened instantly. Finally, meet me at the hospital at 10. I'll bring the paperwork. Signed? I let 3 seconds pass. We'll finish this today. He heard exactly what he wanted to hear. Good. And Harold? Bring the account information too. If Caroline is taking over, we should move the money immediately. Of course. I ended the call. Eleanor looked at me across the kitchen. You sounded convincing. He wants to believe I'm beaten. At 8:47, Victoria called. Blake has started receiving notices. How is he reacting? 3 calls to Meridian's administrator, 2 to the property manager. His CFO is asking why spending approvals are being reviewed. Does he know it's me? No. Keep it that way. At 10 o'clock, I plan to sit across from Blake with an unsigned power of attorney while the company behind his expensive suit began collapsing around him. He thought the meeting was about taking control of my money. In reality, I was waiting to see his face when he realized somebody had already started taking control away from him. At 10, Blake entered the hospital conference room, expecting my signature. Instead, Caroline sat beside Victoria Sterling. Why is she here? Because before Dad signs anything, Caroline said, I want to understand what you're asking me to control. Victoria placed a tablet on the table. Caroline asked to see the driveway recording. Blake froze. The video began. Eleanor walked toward the SUV. Blake looked at her, then slid his foot behind her ankle. She fell into the concrete planter. His voice followed. There. Now maybe everyone will admit you two can't take care of yourselves. Caroline stared at him. You did that. The angle makes it look, you tripped my mother. It was an accident. Then why did you smile? Blake turned to me. You set this up. That camera has been there 6 years. Caroline stood. And the power of attorney papers? You had them prepared before she fell. I was protecting your parents. From what? From themselves. Victoria pushed the document toward him. Your proposal gives Caroline broad authority over their accounts, investments, and property. The $200,000. That's what this was about. My company employs people. Families depend on me. So you hurt Mom to save your company? I did not hurt her. Victoria replayed the fall. Blake slammed his palm down. Turn that off! Caroline flinched, but stayed standing. How long have you been planning to take their money? You're being manipulated. By the camera. He pointed at me. Harold has always hated me. Caroline shook her head. Dad helped you when nobody else would. Blake laughed. Your father never invested a dime in Vantage Flow. Victoria looked at me. I nodded. Meridian Growth Partners invested approximately $1.4 million in Vantage Flow. Blake shrugged. So? Harold controls Meridian. Silence. Blake stared at me. That's impossible. Why? I asked. You were a distribution manager. I was. Victoria explained that years earlier I had built and sold a freight routing and warehouse optimization company, then invested through private entities. Blake sat down. You funded me? I invested in a company I thought had potential. Why didn't you tell me? I wanted to see how you treated people when you thought they had nothing you needed. Caroline looked sick. You mocked Dad for being poor while taking his money. You hurt Mom, called her confused, then tried to put me in control of their accounts. I was trying to save us. There is no us if saving us means destroying them. Blake reached for her. She stepped back. Don't touch me. His phone vibrated. He ignored it. It rang again. Answer it, Victoria said. Blake did. What? His CFO was speaking fast enough that I heard fragments. Funding suspended, expense review, landlord notice. Blake's face drained. What do you mean suspended? He looked at me. What did you do? I stopped protecting you from your own decisions. Turn it back on. No. You can't destroy my company over a family argument. Caroline stared at him. You still think this is an argument? Blake grabbed his folder. I'm going to the office. Don't come home tonight, Caroline said. He stopped. You don't mean that. She looked at the frozen image of his foot behind Eleanor's ankle. For the first time in years, I know exactly what I mean. Blake left. Caroline sat down and began to cry. Dad, if that camera hadn't been there, would I have believed him instead of Mom? I couldn't answer for her. She wiped her face. I think I would have. Blake had spent years teaching my daughter to doubt her own judgment. Victoria's phone buzzed. She read the message. Blake is heading to Vantage Flow. Good. Caroline looked up. Why? Victoria closed the folder. Because the funding notice was only the first thing waiting for him. Blake was racing across Chicago to save the company he believed belonged to him. He still didn't know his office sat inside a building controlled by Whitaker Meridian Holdings. By the time he reached the 4th floor, he was about to discover that losing my money was only the beginning. Blake reached Vantage Flow Systems at 11:18 and discovered the first thing he had lost was the right to walk through his own front door. He pressed his keycard against the reader. Red light. Access denied. He tried again. Same result. What the hell? Through the glass, his CFO, Daniel Price, hurried toward him. A property manager arrived from the elevator at the same time. Mr. Harrington, your access has been temporarily restricted pending resolution of lease defaults. I'm the CEO of this company. I'm aware. Then open the door. I can't. Blake called Daniel. Tell him to let me in. Daniel's voice came through the phone. Blake, the office is the least of our problems. What happened? Meridian suspended funding. Payroll is due Friday. Our operating account is under review, and auditors are requesting expense documentation. Tell them to wait. They won't. Blake looked around the polished lobby where he had once posed for photographs beneath the Vantage Flow logo. Who authorized this? Meridian. Then call them. I've called 6 times. Blake turned on the property manager. Who owns this building? Whitaker Meridian Holdings. The name stopped him. Whitaker? The manager said nothing more. Blake stepped away and called Victoria Sterling. Put Harold on the phone. Mr. Whitaker isn't here. You work for him. I represent his interests. You froze my company. No. Meridian Growth Partners suspended additional capital under the provisions in your funding agreement. Restore it. That isn't your decision. And my office? Your company has unresolved lease defaults. Blake lowered his voice. This is retaliation. Then I suggest you have your attorney review the contracts you signed. She ended the call. Blake stood staring at his phone. For years he had believed success meant expensive suits, a prestigious address, investors returning his calls, and employees waiting when he entered a room. In less than 2 hours, every one of those things had become conditional. Daniel finally convinced the property manager to let Blake enter under supervision to retrieve documents. Inside, the atmosphere had changed. Employees whispered. 2 members of the finance team were copying records for auditors. Blake stormed into Daniel's office. How much cash? Without new funding? Maybe 3 weeks. Less if vendors accelerate collections. Use the credit line. Nearly exhausted. Delay payroll. Daniel stared at him. That's your solution? My solution is surviving. Daniel pushed a stack of reports toward him. Then explain these. Luxury vehicle expenses. Hotel bills. Restaurants. Personal purchases charged as client development. Blake shoved them away. Legitimate business expenses. The auditors will decide that. His phone rang. Carolyn. Finally, he snapped. Tell your father to stop this. I'm not calling about Dad. Then what? I've moved my salary into an account in my name. I've removed your access to my personal savings and canceled the additional cards attached to my credit. Blake went silent. You can't do that. I already did. Caroline, listen to me. Your father is trying to destroy our marriage. No, you did that when you tripped my mother and lied to my face. She hung up. Blake hurled his phone onto the desk. Daniel stared at him. You tripped her mother? Stay out of my family. Your family just became relevant when our investor froze the company. Blake grabbed the expense reports and walked out. In the lobby, he stopped beneath the directory and looked again at the ownership notice the property manager had given him. Whitaker Meridian Holdings. The same surname as the old man he had mocked for driving a 12-year-old car. The same man who had just admitted controlling Meridian Growth Partners. Blake finally understood that Harold wasn't merely an investor. The network surrounding Vantage Flow had been closer to him than he ever imagined. But instead of frightening him into stopping, the realization made him desperate. At 12:07, my security system alerted me that Blake's SUV had entered our neighborhood. I opened the live camera feed. He was driving too fast. Eleanor sat beside me. He's coming here, isn't he? Yes. What does he want? I watched his SUV turn onto our street. The same thing he wanted yesterday. $200,000. No, I said. Yesterday he wanted the money. Today he needs it. Blake's SUV stopped hard in front of our house. He slammed the door and marched toward us carrying the power of attorney folder. This time, I wasn't going to let him leave, believing he still had something to threaten us with. Blake didn't knock. He opened our front door and marched into the living room with the power of attorney folder crushed beneath one arm. $200,000, he said. Today. Eleanor sat beside me, her bandage visible. Caroline stood near the window. Victoria occupied the chair across from us with 3 folders arranged on the table. Blake stopped when he saw her. What is this? Sit down, I said. I'm not sitting down. You froze my funding, locked me out of my office, and turned Caroline against me. Nobody turned me against you, Caroline said. You did that yourself. Blake ignored her. Harold, you want to punish me? Fine. But Vantage Flow has employees. Payroll is coming. Give me the 200,000 and I'll deal with everything else later. Yesterday it was an investment. It still is. Yesterday you said the company was healthy. It is. Victoria opened the first folder. Then perhaps you can explain why Meridian Growth Partners has provided approximately $1.4 million in capital while Vantage Flow continues burning cash. Blake stared at her. You had no right to suspend it. The agreement you signed says otherwise. She opened another folder. Your company also has unresolved lease obligations. You're using the building against me. I leaned forward. Whose building, Blake? His eyes moved toward me. Whitaker Meridian Holdings. Correct. You own it? Through the holding company. He laughed once, but there was no humor in it. So this whole time you were playing poor. I never told you I was poor. You decided that because of my car and my house, Eleanor added quietly. And then you decided that meant we were easy to control. Blake turned toward Caroline. You knew about this? I learned today. And you're okay with your father destroying my company? Your company was already failing. His face tightened. You don't understand business. Maybe not. But I understand what I saw on that camera. Silence. Blake looked at me. That again? Eleanor fell. Then this should be easy. I pushed the tablet across the table. The video began without sound. Eleanor walked toward him carrying his jacket. Blake glanced at her feet. His leg moved. His shoe slid behind her ankle. Eleanor went down. Her head struck the planter. Blake's face changed as he watched himself. I turned up the volume. His own voice filled the room. There. Now maybe everyone will admit you two can't take care of yourselves. Nobody spoke. Caroline's eyes stayed on Blake. Eleanor didn't look at the screen. She looked directly at him. Tell me again that I fell. Blake swallowed. The angle is misleading. Victoria replayed it. Would you like another angle? Turn it off. She didn't. The recording continued into his comments about Eleanor being confused, assisted living, financial control, and power of attorney. Blake reached for the tablet. I pulled it away. Careful. You're threatening me with an accident. No, I'm showing you what you did. He stood. You think a video gives you the right to destroy my life? Caroline stepped between him and the door. You tried to use Mom's injury to take control of their lives. I was trying to save our future. Whose future? She asked. Because every time you say family, you mean yourself. Blake's voice dropped. Caroline, come home with me. We can fix this. I'm not coming home. I'm your husband, and she's my mother. He looked at Eleanor, then at me. What do you want? That was the first honest question he had asked. Nothing from you, I said. That's what you still don't understand. Victoria opened the final folder. The audit will continue. Any disputed expenditures will be reviewed under the agreements governing Vantage Flow's funding. The lease matter will proceed separately. Blake pointed at the tablet. And that? Victoria's expression didn't change. The original recording has been preserved. Copies have been secured outside this house, along with the relevant documents and timestamps. His anger disappeared for 1 second. Fear replaced it. You sent it to someone? You should assume the evidence no longer depends on anyone in this room keeping quiet. Blake looked at Caroline. She didn't move toward him. He looked at Eleanor. She didn't look away. Finally, he looked at me, and I watched the last piece of confidence leave his face. Yesterday, he had believed one injured woman and one frightened old man stood between him and the money he needed. Now he understood the truth. The $200,000 was no longer his biggest problem. And the next people asking him questions weren't going to be family. Blake stood in our living room waiting for someone to save him. Nobody did. Caroline reached into her bag and placed an envelope beside the power of attorney papers. What's that? He asked. A petition for divorce. For the first time all day, Blake had nothing to say. Caroline, don't do this because you're angry. I'm not angry anymore. That's why I'm doing it. He looked at Eleanor. Tell her families forgive mistakes. My wife touched the bandage above her temple. A mistake is forgetting an anniversary. You put your foot behind my ankle and watched me hit concrete. I never meant for you to get hurt, but you meant for me to fall. Blake turned to me. You planned all of this. No. I prepared for the possibility that someday you would show us who you really were. You destroyed my company. I stopped protecting it. Victoria closed the folders. The distinction may become important. She explained that the security recording, financial records, and relevant documents would be preserved and provided through the proper legal channels. The audit would continue. Any misuse of company funds would be handled according to the evidence and applicable agreements. Blake's face twisted. So that's it? You all just take everything? Caroline shook her head. No, Blake. We're taking ourselves back. He looked around the room one final time, perhaps searching for the frightened old couple he thought he had controlled 2 days earlier. They were gone. You'll regret this, he said. I opened the front door. Maybe, but we'll regret it on our own terms. He walked out alone. Over the next several weeks, the life Blake had built began separating into facts instead of appearances. Meridian Growth Partners did not restore its funding. Vantage Flow's board reviewed the company's finances, and the expense audit raised questions Blake could no longer dismiss as family drama. The lease dispute moved through its contractual process. Caroline separated her finances completely and moved into our guest room while her attorney handled the divorce. I didn't celebrate any of it. There was nothing satisfying about watching my daughter's marriage collapse or seeing Eleanor wake at night, remembering the sound of her head striking concrete. Consequences are not the same thing as revenge. I didn't manufacture Blake's problems. I simply stopped using my money, property, and influence to shield him from them. Caroline struggled most with that truth. One evening she sat with me on the porch and said, I keep wondering how I didn't see him, because he didn't treat you badly every minute. Does that make me stupid? No. It means manipulation works best when it arrives between ordinary days. She looked through the window at Eleanor reading in her chair. I almost helped him take control of you, but you didn't, only because Mom got hurt. I shook my head. No, because when you finally saw the truth, you chose what to do with it. Eleanor's stitches came out. Her bruises faded. Her arthritis still made her move slowly some mornings, but she returned to the library volunteer group she loved and refused every suggestion that she should become afraid of her own driveway. I kept my 12-year-old car. We kept our house. Nothing about our daily life suddenly became luxurious because Blake learned we had money. That had never been the point. Months later, I stood beneath the same garage camera while Eleanor watered flowers beside the planter she had struck. You know, she said, Blake always thought that old car meant we had nothing. I know. Are you finally going to replace it? I looked toward the driveway. Maybe next year, she laughed. And for the first time since the fall, I laughed with her. Blake's greatest mistake wasn't asking me for $200,000. It wasn't even assuming I was richer than I appeared. His greatest mistake was believing age made us helpless, kindness made us weak, and silence meant we weren't paying attention. I had spent decades learning that the strongest position in any negotiation is knowing exactly what you control. Blake never learned that lesson. By the time he discovered who had been standing quietly across the table from him, he had already lost the one thing no amount of money could buy back: our trust.